So thanks all for coming to the conference. We're delighted that we've got the record turnout and the record number of countries being represented. So some of the things that I'm going to say are along the same lines as what Justin was talking about. I'm not trying to duplicate any efforts, and I'm not going to try and go into the detail of all the countries, because we're going to hear from them afterwards. So this is a map from 1961 of where the big beef production was in those days. And you can see the darker colors are where the most beef was produced. And US was the biggest then. And Latin America, not surprisingly, still quite big even in the 1960s, with Europe significant. But then over time, what we see is that the whole world in general is just producing more beef. And whether you agree that buffalo is beef or not, that's the way the world generally sees it. And so going from 1961, long before I was born, of course, until 2014, you can see that basically the whole world is getting darker blue. And quite a lot of the countries that turn blue later are not what we think of as being traditional beef-producing countries. So those of you who remember a bit of history from school remember the Roman senator Cato, who always used to end all of his speeches with, "Furthermore, I consider." And I'm not going to talk about the destruction of Carthage as he did, but I'm going to talk about the fact that our global industry are judged on our global performance. So it's fantastic that we've got all of the countries that we've got here, but the global industry is even more than the 25 countries who are here today. And we often hear from people that, well, our footprint isn't like that. You know, we're much better than the global average. But it's the global average which is what informs people. It's the global average which gets quoted endlessly, whether it's in FAO papers or others. And I think that, like Justin was saying, we should recognize that as an opportunity to improve and to tell people what we're doing proactively to get better, not just in our own countries, but to stimulate that improvement in other countries. So the growth, as Justin was talking about, has been continuous and consistent. 500 million in 1900, 500 million head worldwide, 1 billion in 1960, around about 1.6 billion today, and continuing to increase like that. And the consumption has basically followed the human population. So human population is going to reach about 10 billion by the middle of the century, and beef production will have increased concomitantly. I think worth noting that in 1960, when we had 1 billion head, 90%, half of the world in 1960 lived in extreme poverty, and only 9% today. So you can see a lot has changed in the lifetime of somebody of my age, or many of the people in this room's age. In 2022, Brazil produced about 10.5 million tons, compared to 4 million tons back in 1990, and China will be producing 8 million tons compared to only 1 million in 1990. And these are the countries that I was talking about, non-typical countries. More than half, 55% of the herd is in China, India, Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East and North Africa, and the rest of Asia. These aren't countries that we have always thought of as big beef producers, but 55% of the herd in 2006 already. But that was only producing a quarter of the meat. So they were selling half of what potentially you would have expected them to be able to be doing. In 2022, they'll have 60%, nearly 60% of the herd. And their efficiency is increasing, so they'll be selling 35% of the meat. And you can see that the light blue columns here are developing countries, and the dark blue columns are the more developed countries. You can see that although, as Justin said, it is definitely increasing in developed countries, the trend is growing faster in the developing countries. And so is the consumption. So again here, the light blue ones, those columns are getting longer, faster in the developing countries. Not surprising, that's where most of the global population is. As people come out of poverty and incomes increase, they are going to have more disposable income. And of course, what would you want to spend it on? It's always going to be beef. So this is the trend, and we need to keep that in mind. Why this is important for sustainability is that if we look at the moment, and sorry for just focusing on greenhouse gases, but this is something very topical this week with the IPCC report. And if we look at the intensity of emissions from some of those non-typical producer countries, or the ones that we are really growing fastest now, the intensity of emissions per kilo of beef produced is higher in those countries. So it's worth focusing on those countries, because that is reflected in our global footprint, our global beef footprint. We know that it's possible to work on this. We know that this is an example from Canada, and you can see that they've managed to reduce the methane emissions, the nitrous oxide, the carbon dioxide, since 1981. So all of those figures there are comparisons, improvements in relation to 1981. It's possible in Canada. It's possible here in Ireland. The Carbon Navigator is a good tool for producers to show them how they can work on things and make significant improvements. And those of you who came on the ABP tour yesterday, we visited a perfectly ordinary farm, and we heard how just through sire selection, just through one thing, using the right sire for the calves they were buying, they could have an improvement of 13% in their greenhouse gas emissions. So, you know, we have the ability to do this. We can make it happen, and we should really be looking towards those countries where the growth is happening and helping them to make it happen as well. It's good for them. It's good for us, because it will improve, in general, the performance of the beef industry, and it will keep consumer confidence in beef. Of course, most countries have made climate commitments anyway, so, you know, it's a prerogative we all have to work with in any case. So if we look at natural resources, there are also examples from this one from Brazil of how you can still continue to increase beef production and the second line there, soy production, while reducing your natural resource footprint. So the deforestation rate there, you see from about high point in 2003, declined. And okay, this stops at 2013, and there has definitely been undulation since then. The deforestation didn't remain low. But what did happen is the cattle production has continued to increase, and it's through intensification, sustainable intensification. So that's a positive story from Brazil. We also know that in other countries there is also increased production with a lowered footprint. I read just last week from Australia that the amount of land being used for cattle there has decreased while the amount of conservation land has increased. But at the same time, they managed to maintain or improve the amount of beef that they produce. But beef is only one part of the livestock development story, and if you look at the color of beef is the sort of orangey color on all of those wheels there. There's a lot of other animal protein out there, and while, as Justin said, beef has a large carbon footprint per kilo compared to the others, there's a huge amount of other work to be done. And I think the beef industry has demonstrated leadership here, whereas some of the others haven't yet woken up to the challenges. I mean, the reason that we're involved in the global agenda for sustainable livestock, which is an FAO initiative, it's a sort of global overarching multi-stakeholder initiative for all livestock, is because of this. We want to take our story from the beef industry and talk to other people from other livestock sectors about what we've done, and basically tell them about the success of this kind of multi-stakeholder approach. We've got a lot of private sector partners in our various roundtables. I think if you look at all of the national roundtables and add their members together, we're probably talking at least 400 companies now involved in beef production. And I think that is a model that other livestock sectors can learn a lot from. Okay, animal health and well-being. We heard about our own antimicrobial stewardship statement. I'm not going to go into details because you've all participated in the process of producing that. We're very pleased that our membership approved it with a huge majority. 93% of our members were in favor of that statement. But pharmaceutical stewardship is even bigger than antimicrobials. Of course, they're a huge one in the public eye. They're a big concern because of the human health implications. But we also need to think about the implications for our own industry if we use other pharmaceuticals inefficiently. And we're going to hear, we have a session on innovations in animal health. We're going to hear about preventative medicine. We're going to hear about approaches to avoiding resistance in other types of pharmaceuticals, like, for example, anthelmintics. All of them are going to be important because, of course, animal health is a huge part of that efficiency story. When we talk about our 5 principles, and it sounds like you've got these 5 buckets, but they're all very closely related. In the end, we can improve our performance in all areas, and all of those things strengthen and reinforce the other. Animal well-being is an interesting story, and of course it's one that gets a lot more attention in the developed world. And maybe that's logical if you look at human development and the state at which we live and the things that we can be worried about compared to lower income countries. Naturally, our priorities are going to be different. And I remember, to me, a quite shocking question I got from an audience in China when we were talking about animal well-being. And one of the people asked me about a practice, which I'm not going to go into because it was quite horrendous, that they were using for slaughter. And I said, well, do you think that your consumers, even in your own country, would like to know that that's how your animals are being treated? And he said, no, but we're not going to tell them that. I said, well, you know, that's not really the point. If you think that they wouldn't appreciate that and they wouldn't want to know that that's what's happening, then you probably should not be doing it. Animal welfare is an increasing concern for not just the beef world, and obviously that's one of the things that alternative proteins are targeting. They're talking about animal welfare a lot. It's also a significant concern to the leather industry who buy the hides from us. And we have the session on Friday with the leather industry, and they're certainly going to be talking about well-being in that session. That was just somebody from Australia showing that a calm and well-managed herd that has low stress levels is easier on the owners and the managers, but is also more productive. Another issue about well-being is, of course, the one you'll have probably heard more about, and certainly if you come from Australia, is live export and, in general, the transport of animals. I think the lesson learned from the whole live export problems in Australia is that there are things that can go wrong beyond the farm gate and beyond the control of the companies who are selling the cattle, which can have a huge impact on your industry. And if you think that animal well-being isn't important to you, you just need something like this to make you realize how important it can become very quickly. I think that the actions that have been taken subsequently to educate in Indonesia, to work with the feedlots and the slaughterhouses and to get things sorted in Indonesia have been a good example of how we should be viewing working with our less developed country partners. So we're selling to them, or they're just producing anyway, and it's all seen as part of the beef industry. We need to realize that it's all connected, and if people get an impression that the beef industry in one country is a cause of bad animal welfare or big problems, it is going to affect us all, even if it's not directly related to what we do ourselves. You know, I'm sure that anyone who's read a few headlines about production here in Ireland will understand that they've had a hard year. It was a dry summer. They had come out of a late and cold winter, which meant that fodder production was low. And the priority for all of us is to make this a profitable and economically viable industry. There's huge variability within countries, and you know, farmers always want to know who's going to pay for this. And it's somewhat trite to say sustainability will pay for itself. Ultimately, yes, it will. But if you don't have the resources to make a change, you need help. We can't just assume that everybody has the resources to become a sustainable producer overnight. So we need to help them. And yeah, these are just a few photos of different countries where we can see all of these people need to help to become as sustainable as the best in the world. So that's kind of, I'm going to finish here. I've got one more slide, but I'll leave that one on communications, because I think we've already heard enough about communications. We need to help all producers around the world to get to the level that the best are already at. So thanks very much.